Hey, Dr. Hammond, Kevin Maloney here, giving you my answer for Module 2. So the question is, please describe in your own words how the following influence the composition known as a symphony. The definitions are trio sonata, binary form, concerto grosso, overture, and sinfonia. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a brief definition of each word, and then give the reason why it influenced the symphony. So the Trio Sonata was from the Baroque era. It was written in three parts, or it was popular in Baroque era. It was written in three parts. There were two top parts, which were violins or high melody instruments, maybe such as flute, oboe, some other early wind instruments. Followed or with a basso continuo part, usually played by a cello, sometimes a bassoon, just depends on the composer, and was accompanied by a harpsichord. Like I said, instrumentation could be varied, but it was the most common form of the Baroque era. Notable composers such as Corelli, Handel, Couperin, and Vivaldi wrote in this style, but it influenced the texture of the symphony at a very basic level. With its voicings, there were a lot of parallel movements, such as thirds, sticks, kind of in a triadic harmony, and then obviously the underlying harmonic structure with the harpsichord improvising or other instruments. The second term is binary form. It was very popular, still popular today, but 17th through 19th century was when it was in its heyday. There are two related sections. There's an A and there's a B section with a repeat section at the end of each section. So in reality, it's A, B, B. The A section typically would begin in major, and then it would modulate to the dominant fifth or the fifth, and then do our cadence on a 5 chord, and then start on a 5 chord, cadence on the home or tonic key. Just depends. But if it started in a minor key, it would modulate to the relative major. But the B section would begin in the new key, and it always returned home. Composers always, or a lot of composers from this era wrote, but two that come to my mind are J.S. Bach and Scarlatti, being prolific keyboard composers. This influenced the structure of the symphony. Binary form was used a lot, as I was saying, in Baroque keyboard sonatas, in its structure, and it kind of developed the individual movement of each symphony. And even in symphonies today, you can find usually sonata form. Going to the Romantic era, it just depends. And it can also be found a lot in the minuet, trio, or scherzo movement of a symphony, which is typically the third movement of the work. Concerto grosso was a very big Baroque orchestral music genre. It would go back and forth between a small group of soloists, if it was concerti, or a single instrument concerto, and the full orchestra, so back and forth, just like a concerto you would hear today. The small groups would identify thematic material within the first movement, such as symphonies do a lot of the times. Instrumentation, as I was stating earlier, kind of varied between two violins for very, very early Baroque. Two violins plus a continuo plus a harpsichord, like I was talking about in the first definition of trio sonata. And it usually was in a 3-movement, fast, slow, fast structure, which can still be seen today, but also really you saw a lot going up through the classical period, when Beethoven started writing symphonies, when the symphony started really becoming a vital part of our repertoire. Notable composers that wrote in this were Corelli, Vivaldi, Handel, in their time. But it influenced the symphony with the scoring, voicing of the instruments used, and the colors going back and forth, maybe between groups of strings, group of winds, back and forth. It just depends on what the composer was composing at the time. Thematic material could be found in the first movement, like you see a lot, and then it was further defined with the subsections of each orchestra that was performing the concerto. An overture was made popular by the French. It was very grandiose. It used a lot of dotted rhythms. And it was mainly just introductional material, just kind of stating, here we are, here's the music. So it wasn't necessarily thematic, and if you played it by itself, it would sound all right, but it also had work that came afterwards that would make it make more sense as a whole. But most symphonies include one, especially during the classical era. And finally, the Sinfonia was of Italian origin in their early Baroque period. Its name referred to orchestral introductions to operas and cantatas. Or the overture would start and then sometimes symphonia would follow. Notable composers of sinfonias were Sammartini, Mann, Stamitz, and Bach. Bach actually wrote, and I've attempted to play some of these on piano, three-part inventions. So he would, so it wasn't only an orchestral genre, it did transfer to the keyboard. And you have three independent voices happening at once, but influenced the symphony as it evolved into the orchestral symphony, due again to the form of fast, slow, fast. Thank you.